Hello, Steve again, talking about Lab 2 in IT222. What we're looking at here is a network map of the IT222 VLAN I set up for this class. It shows we have the workstation I used in Lab 1 that had Nessus on it, as well as a Linux server, Windows server, and then the workstation that I used to view the websites. Um, the only new addition in this lab is this router here. When I first configured each machine, I set up a gateway IP of the 192.168.222.1. That way, when I plugged in the router in this portion of the lab, all I had to do was configure it and it was good to go. So on this lab, I used my Nessus reports from Lab 1. I save them as a HTML file and have them on my jump drive so I can access them whenever I need to. Right now we're looking at the Windows server that ends in .30, and this one had the critical issue of the PHP used. It was an unsupported version, so part of the hardening involved updating this version to at least 5.6. We also had the website was easily or potentially vulnerable to clickjacking. WordPress user enumeration, which means that a script could go through and figure out all the usernames used on the WordPress site. And then web server transmits clear text credentials. So that'd be when you went to sign in, anything you typed could be easily intercepted. Switching over to the Linux Nessus report that ends in .20. It didn't have any critical vulnerabilities, but website users were able to browse web directories. Otherwise, everything else was the same compared to the Windows server. So we're going to jump over, take a look. Right now, we're in the Windows web server. We'll jump over to the workstation. So this is my Linux website. Pretty plain. When you go to log in, it now shows a website security certificate issue. And this was involved when I secured the login page. So it used to be an HTTP connection. Now it's an HTTPS. What I did was create a self-signed certificate and then associated that with the website. So that last error we saw was because it's a self-signed certificate. It's not as weighted as a certificate received from a vendor. Because if it's self-signed, anyone can make one. But if you have one from a vendor, then it has more weight behind it, more authority. Next, we'll look at how I lock down the web directories. So this is a folder that's inside the website. Before, if we tried to go to this link, it would show a directory of everything in that folder. So now it shows it's forbidden. Anyone that uses the website does not have access to that anymore, which is a good thing. Going over to the Windows WordPress site. Right now we can see it's in HTTP as well, but when we go to log in, it's going to show the same certificate issue. That's because I made a similar certificate on the Windows server. If these were websites used on the internet, then I could go and get a vendor supplied certificate. But because this is used on an internal network with internal IP addresses, I had to settle with a self-signed certificate. Does the same job for my purposes, but there's options. Then we'll take a glance at the Linux server. All of this was done with command line, obviously. This is a view of the htaccess. And this is how I lock down the directory browsing using options.indexes that restricts access from web users to seeing that info. This next function, the if module, what this does is it looks for any scripts that come in and try to scan through the user enumeration. and if it finds that, it's going to deny that script. So this is an attempt to stop that. There's still other ways around it, but this is one of the more effective versions I found. So on Linux, I put in the htaccess folder. If we jump over to Windows Server, I put it in the functions script. And this is a massive script, about 5,000 lines. I only put about 10 lines in from a site I found online. It does the same thing as what I did with the Linux side, but instead of being in the htaccess config file, it's in the functions.php file. So different spot, does the same thing though. So that's a quick run through of how I went and hardened my servers on this lab. I hope you enjoyed.